Okay. All right. Once again, good evening, everyone. So for today's meeting, we want to learn the city's plans for vehicular traffic in its context of safety for Cummins Highway. We're going to begin by starting off with reviewing some common terms and then learn about all the factors that we've considered in designing the intersections along not only Cummins Highway, but throughout the city of Boston. With that being said, we will learn about the Cummins Highway Reconstruction project. I'll give you guys just a quick update of where we're at and what we've been doing. We'll talk about the project goals and the opportunities. We'll review specific designs for Cummins Highway, and of course, the next steps for this project. All right, so just giving you guys just a quick update on the Cummins Highway. We ended the trial on Cummins Highway in October of 2021. And until construction begins, the street will be with the way that it was before the trial. As you can see, Cummins Highway is now 2 lanes in each direction. We did somewhat remove the bike lane as well as the flex post along the corridor. Throughout 2021, we collected data on the traffic speeds, the travel times, and your experience in the 1 lane of Cummins Highway. I think we just lost the presentation. Is that true?
Sorry, my fault.
No worries. But yeah, so I mean, as I mentioned, we collected data during the pilot to take a look at traffic speeds, travel times, as well as solicited feedback about your experience with the pilot. If you have any questions or want more information in regards to the Cummins Highway project, please visit boston.gov/Cummins-Highway to review the data that we collected. As we continue to mention, the data that we collect will and has been informing how we design a new Cummins Highway. So your input in that aspect is very crucial. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, your input is very crucial. This design will shape how Cummins Highway will be for the next 70 years. So ultimately, we want to produce a design that addresses a number of concerns that we have seen along the corridor as well as the neighborhood has raised. I mean, to address safety in regards to improvements for pedestrians, cyclists, as well as vehicles. We are currently doing community outreach to inform on the final design, and we'll be continuing to do so until that is completed. Next slide, please. So why do we plan to reconstruct Cummins Highway? Cummins Highway hasn't been updated since the spring of 1955. At that time, streetcars ran along Cummins Highway, and they were removed in 1953 to make room for more cars. So as you can see, I mean, with the removal of the streetcar, the street layout now, what it does is it reflects the priorities of 1950s, which is essentially enabled non-residents to drive quickly through this neighborhood. Next slide, please. Still in the next slide. All right. And I'll slow down to give Ashley and Suzanne some time to get through the slides. But so for the Cummins Highway reconstruction, for this construction and for this project, what we plan to do is completely rebuild the street. That includes reconstructing the sidewalks, the curbs, the street lights, traffic signals, the road pavement, and as well as replacing and updating utilities along the corridor. Boston Water has already completed their improvements and the upgrades to their facilities along this corridor, and National Grid is actually out there actively upgrading their facilities. As of right now, the city has budgeted approximately $24 million for the reconstruction for Cummins Highway. So this is a huge investment for this corridor for the Mattapan neighborhood. Whenever you're ready, Stephanie. So with the Cummins Highway reconstruction project, I mean, our goals are to advance the goals from Go Boston 2030. some of the initiatives and goals that we have listed through this initiative is to improve safety on our streets, to reduce emissions, and invest in communities that have a tree to achieve equity and access to opportunities. So in order to do that, what we've done is partnered with other city departments to advance our collective plans. What we want to do is we want to work to inform residents of the work that is happening around the city, and we also try and work to improve our collaboration in our work and achieve neighborhood and citywide goals. As I mentioned, I mean, the city, we have our goals in terms of what we envision for the city of Boston to be. And we understand that the residents also have their goals and their needs that need to be addressed through all these processes. So as I mentioned, what we work on is our collaboration with residents to advance your goals. We try to increase awareness and participation in efforts that you care about, as well as confirm your vision for your future through our projects. I mean, as I mentioned, your input is critical and vital in the projects that we push forward. And ultimately, we can't do any of this without you guys. With that, we'll shift over into some of the glossary of the traffic-related terms that we'll be using for this evening to discuss intersection design. With that, I'll turn it over to John.
Thanks, Jeff. And thanks everyone for coming on and attending this evening. We just want to start off with a few slides to talk about some commonly used terms that we'll be repeating throughout the rest of the presentation, just so that we can explain some of the jargony terms that we throw around casually sometimes, but also to paint a more illustrative picture. Next slide. The first one that I wanted to talk about is the signal cycle. And so it's really just envisioning how long the signal itself takes to go through all of the individual steps at an intersection and to serve all of the different people who are using that. That cycle repeats itself continuously throughout the day in the same steps as they're formed, but during different times of the day, we can make the cycle itself, shown here as a pizza, larger or smaller, depending on the time of day and the needs of that intersection. And I'll explain why we used a pizza in a second. Next slide. So each individual slice of the pizza, or the cycle length itself, we refer to as a phase. And each of those phases are used to provide unique opportunities at the intersection for different things to happen. Sometimes it's the main street getting the green light. Sometimes it's for left turns to be specifically separated. Sometimes it's for specific ways that we allow or communicate to pedestrians that it's their time to crosswalk. And then at other times for the side street, perhaps to get the green. We all know that, the other street, Main Street, needs to get the red. So that change and those turns that are happening are called the phase. Next slide. Clearances. It's an umbrella term that we use that refers to a handful of things, but essentially it's the legally required minimum amount of time that we are providing for various pieces of the signal operation. Some of those examples you'll see in the second bullet there are the amount of yellow time and the amount of red time. So it's actually not the same always at different intersections around the city, depending on the speeds or the size of the intersection. A variety of things go into that to provide that minimum requirement. And then the pedestrian countdown. So when you see the numbers begin to count down on the pedestrian signal, those are also based on a calculation that are federally required for a minimum. That is not to say that those cannot be increased at times. So engineers in our department and in Public Works, we can review those calculations, and sometimes we'll increase those if we just, we determine that there's additional safety benefits to be gained. Sometimes we have concerns from constituents about the green light coming on too quickly, for instance. And so that's sometimes the amount of red time that's given. So next slide. The pedestrian signals specifically, again, we wanted to just break down the pieces of those. A lot of times we speak to members of the public and there's concerns about having enough time to cross the street, or what a variety of these different symbols actually mean. So we just wanted to break it down a little bit in general terms. The walk signal there is that first, the white walking person there, tells people when it is their turn essentially, or when it's, a determined time to cross the street. The countdown, as I said, is a calculation that is guided by the manual on uniform traffic control devices. And then the flashing hand is just a visual indicator of, it's a warning on when that time is about to expire. And then the steady hand at last, it won't be flashing, but that's an indication that it is not an appropriate time for people to be crossing the street. And these different visual cues are aligned with the audio devices that we are upgrading around a lot of the parts of the city. Next slide. So generally we have two types of pedestrian phases and ways to serve the crossings at an intersection. The first one is an exclusive, and this is when pedestrians are directed to cross at a specific time. And all of the crosswalks usually are given the walk symbol, and no vehicles are supposed to be moving through the intersection. Normally we put up a no turn on red sign for vehicles so that they know that that's an exception to that right on red rule there. And then the downside to this is that it does require pedestrians to stand and wait a lot longer than other forms of the walk. Next slide. This is the other general type of pedestrian phase that we have at Signals. It's called a concurrent, and it's generally when pedestrians are directed to cross in parallel to moving traffic. Sometimes that does involve also having motorists turn right or left over the crosswalk itself. It does introduce potential conflicts, and those conflicts are something that we try to take into consideration when we're deciding which of the pedestrian phases to program at an intersection. Next slide. And that last half type, as the title was indicating there, pedestrian head start. Sometimes it's called a pedestrian head start. Sometimes it's called a leading pedestrian interval, or an LPI. And those generally range in time from 4 to 6 seconds. It gives the pedestrians a bit of a jump or a head start to get out off of the curb and into the crosswalk itself. And it improves the sightline and visibility of pedestrians to drivers who might be turning over that crosswalk once the light turns green. So it's a very significant and impactful safety measure. And we do try to apply those where we have these concurrent crosswalks. Next slide. So these are just two types of turns. Again, these are terms that we use when traffic engineering. Permissive turns are when drivers are allowed to turn across oncoming or opposing traffic. And generally, their movement's determined by their own judgment to find a gap in traffic. It does reduce the delay for drivers who are making that movement generally, but it has the potential for greater conflicts. We have a handful of intersections on streets that we're working on now, where we're kind of assessing whether or not that benefit of allowing that permissive overturn to happen is the correct path, because there's so many cars coming in the opposite direction. That gap is just never really found. So it's a safety and a kind of an operations problem that we kind of address case by case. The other form of turns that we can have at an intersection is called protected. And that's when you have a very specific phase to do that turn. Usually you'll see an arrow up on the signal, and then you can make the movement without any type of oncoming or conflicting traffic. It does mean generally a little bit more wait time for those drivers who are making it, but you're able to do that without any other conflicts or oncoming gaps. So next slide. So now that I blew through those terms, we're just going to jump into a little bit of an overview on how we approach the design of some of our intersections, specifically signalized, but also unsignalized, for considerations related to traffic and the safety of all of the users in the area. Next slide. So what we want to start off with is saying that our overall street design, we need to approach it in a way that provides access to people who to places that people want to go to and that they need to be. A list of here is not exhaustive, but it is just a few places: churches, grocery stores, healthcare facilities, and public centers such as libraries. We need to approach it with a design mind that incorporates safe aspects and safe elements for everyone, especially our elders, youth, and people with disabilities, knowing that we want to be especially cautious about the details and the choices in that design, and then support neighborhood-wide and citywide goals of improving public health and access, mitigating urban heat effects, providing greater resilience against storms, and increased tree canopy. So next slide, please. When we design intersections, there's a lot of things we need to consider. We tried to bullet them out here in a bit of general terms. Identifying how many people are using this intersection and what modes they might be using and how they're moving through the intersection itself. We look at a past history of crashes and near miss. Other concerns which are experiential, which might not be logged. That's how we speak to the members of the public, and we interact with folks who are using these intersections and these locations on the street, and try to see what these non-specific data points are and how they're actually experiencing those locations. What the design location is that's nearby, parks, schools, transit access, and housing specifically for elder, perhaps. The other big thing is sight lines and visibility. It's very important for people, whether they're in a car or they're walking on the sidewalk, to be able to see each other. It increases the amount of time that everyone has to either react or make a choice for their own safety. And then managing those interactions, conflicts, and movements, which is a core part of the signal design, the signal operation design. Oftentimes, especially here in Boston, we have limited street space. So depending on some streets or some intersections, those angles that streets could come in from the old cow paths, they could really limit us on what's possible or what we might have versus the roadway itself, which might have a bit more space. So trying to balance and best use that space in a way that benefits a greater purpose. And then utilizing the latest research and guidance in order to influence our design. Next slide. So traffic signals help us to manage most of those conflicts at the intersections. And we can use them at some intersections, specifically where there are high volumes of users, whether they be in vehicles, pedestrians, or people on bikes. And there are specific applications at those locations, at intersections, to use those signals to separate conflicts that are high or problematic, that might happen at high speeds or at low sightline and visibility, like we were talking about. The ideas about traffic signals, primarily they're about control and balance, controlling who gets to move through that intersection and balancing when everyone who's there gets to move. One reminder, the traffic signals are only colored lights on poles. They are recognized almost universally, but they cannot solve for every problem. They are still just indicators to users always. Next slide. So when we're talking about how to balance and control those interactions at an intersection, we try to minimize conflicts by separating the different users from each other. One way is by separating with time. So we control the interactions by giving the different users a specific and unique time within the cycle, the whole pizza, to move or to turn through the intersection. So an example of one of those individual slices of the pizza are left turns across oncoming traffic. If there's a lot of people coming in one direction and we really need to carve out a specific time for people making the left, we would do that protected movement. That's how we would say, okay, we're going to make a specific phase and have a protected left turn. Or when we have a side street, of course, it's much safer if a side street gets their green when the main street gets their red, right? So that's a specific instance of separating the movements and conflicts with time. Alternatively, we can use space or the built environment itself. So physical elements to prevent or better control if and how users interact at the intersection, such as sidewalks, medians, and curb extensions. Next slide, please. As I said, traffic signals aim to control the movements, but inherently they do create delays for travelers. This is because when someone else is moving, you have to wait your turn. So everyone has to wait their turn to move through an intersection at some time. But the thing for a corridor itself is we can coordinate the traffic signals along that corridor. Sometimes you'll hear the term green wave or progression. So that just means that if you imagine moving along the corridor, that it does make sense to go from one intersection to the next intersection to the next. And in that programming, if you do travel at the speed limit, you're more likely to get those several green lights in a row down the street. Next slow. In the very beginning, when we're thinking about changes to or reconstructions of an intersection with perhaps a signal, we collect a lot of data in the beginning. We collect counts of how many people are using the intersection in a variety of ways, how many people are turning in different directions, how many people might be making a U-turn, because that's a very specific need to design for. We also collect what kind of vehicles are being used, personal vehicles, small trucks, large trucks, buses, bikes, pedestrians on foot, things like that. And then the specific crosswalks, we also collect granular data of those crosswalks and how people are using one crosswalk versus another, or which direction they might be traveling in that crosswalk. And the data helps us understand where those potential conflicts between the users are, such as people turning versus people in the crosswalk. Next slide, please. So we have our data, and we actually collected the Cummins Highway data just before the pandemic. I'm sorry, not just, it was 2018, late 2018 we have. And then throughout the pandemic, we've been monitoring the conditions, both volume and speeds. We're not using that data specifically for the analysis because we understand that it was, during the pandemic in a specific condition, but we are trying to just get a sense of how things are progressing pre, during, and post the greatest impact. Projects like Cummins Highway, on projects like Cummins Highway, we can add in what we know as approved or pre-approved developments in the area, such as the Cody Village. So we can take that development and the things that we can analyze and expect from that development and incorporate that into the future expectations for traffic demand. Next slide, please. So we take all of our traffic counts that we've collected, our projected growth model, projected growth information related to developments or other big changes that we know are happening. We put them all into a computer modeling software, generally Synchro. And here's just a clip of one of the screens from Synchro, and it shows a lot of metrics, but we can really use these interfaces to assess the kind of trade-offs that are involved in the design. And then we go out into the field and we observe how people are using that intersection. And we do update the model just so that it better reflects the reality on the ground. Next slide, please. One of the important things that we try to aim for is designing for a normal day. So when we run these synchro models and we try to assess what the morning and evening commute as the peaks or as the busiest times, we understand that the rest of the time of the day, the street is not operating with that volume of traffic. So we need to do a bit of a balancing act so as not to overbuild our streets and have an excess space during the rest of the day. Because what it does is it accommodates speeding along those corridors. And we know that that's both a safety and a quality of life concern. As I said in the beginning, one thing we can do is we can adjust and change the size of the pizza, the cycle length throughout the day. So in those peaks in the AM and the PM, we can make that pizza larger. We can make that total pie to choose from much larger. And then we can shrink it down during the middle of the day or later at night when there's not so much traffic demand. Next slide, please. One thing that's also important to know or to think about is that traffic is very much like a gas. When it's given more space, it generally fills or takes up the space that is available. So traditionally, traffic engineering prioritizes the maximization of speed and the number of vehicles that you can possibly move through an area, whether it's an intersection or along a corridor. That's the traditionally, that is the primary focus. This approach really is far more appropriate for highways and roads where there are no people or significant places. It's not appropriate when we're thinking about areas in the fabric and context of a city. We build our streets for those highest peak volumes, AM and PM commute. The rest of the day and the other times we end up with a lot of space. And again, this excess space encourages really dangerous speeding often, and it also prevents us from using that space for other valuable uses, such as trees or widening sidewalks, including appropriate and comfortable transit and bus facilities like shelters. Next slide, please. Again, this word balance, we are balancing the traffic needs based on our volumes and movements, and then also safety and a variety of other goals that we're including into the mix. We really need to use the right number of travel lanes. And in this case, when we think about it in a middle of the block, we really don't need so many travel lanes because there's more of a continuous flow. And there's less interruptions or conflicts or things to manage happening at the same time. So we have less formal control like signals and less conflicting interaction like large intersections. But then when we get to the intersections themselves, we can open them up a little bit and add perhaps specific turn lanes or an additional through lane or a shared lane where you could make a through or a turn movement. But those are where those kind of processing dimension, is helpful for the operations. Next slide, please. So more balance, competing needs and considerations. Again, when we said about the phases of a cycle, that's the limit on how much time specific streets or movements are given. So that's why we sometimes consider putting turn specific lanes, like a right turn only lane or a left turn only lane. Those are really helpful because they establish a clarity. They clarify what that specific person or that vehicle is going to be doing. And they also can be used to reduce conflicts, either between other vehicles or pedestrians, perhaps in the crosswalks. And then we can go on to see if that turn lane's a good idea. Consider a handful of things. If it's a high volume of people who are making the turn, we say, you know what, this space is best used for that specific turn, and we can consider everyone who's in that lane to be making that movement. Then we can also say how many people, we can also see how many people are continuing through the intersection, how many people are moving in the opposite direction, pedestrians crossing the street, in which crosswalk, and then also consider sight lines. Sometimes we have buildings that are almost right up against an intersection, and we want to make sure that people making turns are given those protected or those specific moments in the cycle to go, and then we can make sure that it's the safest operation for everyone. Movements of pedestrians and motorists all have to be balanced when considering the order that each phase goes in and how much time each one gets. So it's a little bit of an art mixed with the science. Next slide, please. Roundabouts. Generally, they are better than a traditional signalized intersection. I will put the caveat that it does depend on the volume of users, the volume of vehicles. But the reason it's better is that it provides a consistent flow of traffic. There isn't that sitting and waiting for your turn while others are waiting for their turn. This is more of a reduced, slower speed, but a consistent flow. It also improves the drivers, the caution of drivers who are using the intersection, as well as the safety for everyone, whether they're in their car or they're crossing the street as a pedestrian. We can also design roundabouts to accommodate much larger trucks. As you can see in the photo, there's a dark central circle, and then there's a kind of a tan larger circle. That tan larger circle is actually an apron, so that if a fire truck or a tractor trailer needed to go through here, they can actually ride up onto that lip a little bit. So it provides that additional space needed, but not always and not in the entire intersection. We typically prefer roundabouts to have only one lane. It simplifies and consolidates where vehicles are going to be, and it makes it a lot safer for pedestrians to cross only one lane of travel at a time. As you can see also in the image there are little tan wedges on each of the street legs. Those are refuge crossing islands. So pedestrians only cross one lane of traffic at a time. This is a significant increase to safety because you're only looking at one approach or one direction. In general, this type of roundabout also has many fewer conflict points between people who are driving versus and with other drivers, as well as people driving with pedestrians. And another benefit is that there's less open space, open roadway, and exposed asphalt in the intersection itself. So by this, we're also reducing a lot of the heat island effect. Next slide, please. Without traffic signals, we have a toolkit of treatments that can be used. So traffic signals are not the only or always the most appropriate use to control or moderate conflicts and interactions at an intersection. Sometimes a roundabout is more appropriate, slow down speeds, have a safer and consistent travel through the intersection. Crosswalks can try and shorten those up. And as you'll see on the right-hand side, a variety of little icons and graphics of different treatments that we've used. Clear corners, raising crosswalks, narrowing the distance between curbs, and then also evaluating whether a stop sign is the appropriate treatment. Next slide, please. So we're going to run through the intersections, and I will try to leave the proposed up for a few seconds so that you guys can at least get a glimpse, and we can ask some questions later. So we're going to run through the intersections on Cummins Highway that we're making some changes to. Next slide, please. Look at an overview map. I'm sorry. Oh, there we go. Cummins Highway Reconstruction goal, safer and more accessible street, aiming to build a street where traffic can flow, not looking to make a street where it is total congestion, but the traffic can move in a safe and sensible way, and that we're making it safe for people outside of the vehicles as well, especially those with disabilities, our youth, and our elders. Next slide, please. Here's that map. So we'll talk about these 6 locations, or these 5.5 locations. We'll be starting at the top left with Harvard and Wood Ave. Next slide, please. So here's an aerial of the existing conditions. As you see, Cummins Highway, several lanes in each direction, the constructed median there. It's a very large intersection itself, and very long distances for pedestrians to cross Cummins Highway itself. You can see that there's 2 lanes plus the median, 2 more lanes, and parking on both sides generally. There's a lot of drivers coming from all of these approaches, and so it's a very complicated intersection to try and to balance, as we said before, those interactions and conflicts. There are a lot of people coming from Wood Ave and Harvard, making through movements to the north and south, as well as on Cummins Highway going either to the southeast or towards American Legion Highway. Harvard and Wood Ave and Harvard Street, the side streets there, they're only 1 lane in each direction, and they're pretty constrained in dimension. So there's not a whole lot that we can actually do to change how those streets look right now. Well, Cummins Highway has a lot more lanes in both sides, and so there's a little bit more space to play with.
Are these definitive?
I'm sorry, just a moment. So if we could drop a line in the chat, or you could raise your hand, we're going to do some question and answer just after we run through these intersections quickly. So Harvard Street here, Harvard and Wood Ave, right now the pedestrian operation is a concurrent, as we said before. So people crossing Cummins Highway are supposed to cross the street while the vehicles on Harvard or Wood are turning across those crosswalks. Next slide, please. So this is just showing a bit of the bones of what we are currently considering and working with. We're still in the middle of doing analyses, both with traffic and collecting engineering data. So these are not definitive. This is just a preliminary design. We're going to continue to make changes as we work through the details. But what you'll see here in all of the blue is established new space. So we're widening a lot of the sidewalks around here, and in that, reducing the distance that pedestrians need to cross from curb to curb, and then introducing some of those turn-specific lanes, the left lane coming from the northwest, and the right turn lane coming from the southeast there, going from Cummins onto Harvard. What those allow for us to do is consider ways to phase or to serve those movements in the cycle in ways that can improve the operation and allow us to do better for all the users at this location. Right now, we're also considering changes to the pedestrian crossing and to remove those conflicts with the vehicles. So we're assessing that right now. Next slide. In addition, universally along the corridor, we are building bus stops so that they meet our minimum accessible, at least our minimum accessible dimensions. Also that they have room for lean rails and lighting and shelters, and that at all these locations that we'll talk about, we're bringing all of our ramps up to compliance. A lot of them are either kind of on the corner of an intersection, or they're not up to our code in order for accessibility. So next slide, please.
John, I'm just going to quickly explain that the graphics here, what we're focusing on tonight is really what's happening between the curbs. So that's why the sidewalks and other aspects of the design are just in blue. And these are preliminary designs. They are not the final designs. We are still working through all of the engineering and the traffic review and everything that goes into a project of this size. So don't be alarmed. These are preliminary and just meant to help explain what we're thinking based on the information that we have about the corridor.
Thanks so much for that, Stephanie. So the next intersection we'll go down to here is Greenfield, Atway, Bossett, and Cummins Highway. What we know is that this doesn't truly feel like an intersection. What you have are the side streets coming in at angles on the south side, and the corridor is moving along Cummins Highway in a pretty linear fashion. So for folks who are driving on Cummins Highway, it doesn't feel pressing that they slow down or consider what's going on or interact with other users. And as a pedestrian, it's really difficult to cross the multiple travel lanes and that distance that you see there. For folks who are coming from either way Bossett or Greenfield, it's really difficult to turn onto or to cross Cummins Highway to get in another direction, just because of the sight lines and the actual dimension, the size of that intersection. Next slide, please. So as we said about roundabouts, what we're considering here is a way to maintain continuous flow for drivers, but also to clarify for folks who are on Cummins Highway that this is in fact an intersection and there are people who need to either merge into, turn through, or to cross. And right now, the operation of an intersection in the design, it allows drivers on Cummins Highway to see and navigate with pedestrians in the crosswalks, to pass over that crosswalk, and then to assess the situation at the roundabout itself. It also simplifies a lot of the conflict or interaction between drivers because it's always a counterclockwise movement. You're only looking in one direction for those other vehicles. And it also inherently by design maintains safe driving speeds along the corridor. Next slide, please. As I said, roundabouts generally need less open roadway space than a fully signalized intersection. And so we're actually able to provide more generous curb extensions and room for the possibility of landscaping in the area. Pedestrian crosswalks are firstly shorter and safer, also by crossing only one travel lane at a time using those refuge islands that I talked about before. All of the ramps are to be made compliant. And then also you'll see some different markings across Way Bossett and across Greenfield. We're actually looking at raising those crossings so that they're flush with the sidewalk and thus improving the accessibility for folks who are using that crosswalk and prioritizing those pedestrians while slowing drivers who are exiting or entering from the side streets. Next slide, please. The next location is Itasca Ridland. So right now it's a bit of an offset intersection. The streets Ridland and Itasca don't meet each other in opposite sides of Cummins Highway right now. They're a bit of an offset there. So they actually have to have their own phase or slice of the pizza. And what we want to do is to better separate or better manage some of the conflicts within this intersection here. Next slide. So as you'll see, we're introducing a specific left turn lane on Cummins Highway onto Itasca. We know that the volume making that movement today is moderate, but it's hard for folks to be trying to make that turn while other drivers on Cummins Highway are just looking to go through the intersection southeast bound. So we're giving them a specific lane to kind of move out of the way and let the through traffic continue alongside. We're also looking at the way that the phases and the signal cycle happens throughout the day and try and kind of improve things for folks who are using this location. Next slide, please. Next up is Woodhaven here. So it's just generally near the MBTA station on the bridge to the right of the image. This one has some unique challenges because of the bridge itself. It has both a crest in the middle, so it's difficult to see all the way across the bridge as a driver or a pedestrian. And there is a kind of curve in the road as well. There's also a missing crosswalk. I'm sure that there was a reason that they decided not to put one, but it's a significant user issue not to have the crosswalk on that east side there. Next slide, please. So again, here we're looking to put a left turn lane. Similar reasons at Riddle and Itasca. Get those folks in a specific place so that they can stand or they can wait for the signal and get them out of the way of the other drivers who are making a through movement in either direction. As you'll also see to the right of the screen on the bridge is we are opening it up to 2 travel lanes from the bridge all the way down to Mattapan Square. And also at this location, you'll see that we've introduced the second crosswalk so that there are full choices for pedestrians and those crosswalks are shorter. Again, we'll be making the ramps compliant and accessible. Next slide, please. This last part here, Rexford, Rockdale. So again, another offset intersection, but interestingly, it is a one-way in on Rockdale and a one-way out on Rexford. So we know that folks want to be making the left turn from Cummins onto Rexford. And so we'll get to the design in just a minute on how we accommodate that. Right now, there's only one crosswalk over Cummins Highway. See on the left side there. And there's no specific pedestrian signal to let folks know when they're supposed to be crossing Rexford Street. So right now it's just completely uncontrolled. And yep, great. And we're going to include Rexford Street into the overall signal of the intersection. So we're going to pull that stop line back so that folks can make the left turn. We're adding that second crosswalk on the southern side to complete the intersection, shortening those crosswalk distances, again, maintaining 2 travel lanes toward Mattapan. And next slide, please. So there is an ongoing effort with the Blue Hill Ave project and the Mattapan Square redesign. We're coordinating with our colleagues who are working primarily on that project, on the Mattapan Square project. And right now, we're not proposing to reduce the travel lanes coming from Cummins Highway towards the square, the circle. So as you saw, 2 travel lanes from Woodhaven down to through Fairway. We're also working with them about the signal changes at the square itself and how Cummins Highway between Fairway and the square on that block and a half might look. For more information on that project, there's a link down there, boston.gov/blue-hill-ave. Next slide, please. Great. So I'm going to pass it back off to Jeff, who's going to talk about some of the next steps and stages for the Cummins Highway project.
Actually, think that is my section. Is
Yes.
that correct? All right.
Sorry, Jen. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Off to Jen.
Do you all want to take a few questions since the presentation just ended? It was a lot of info. We've got a lot of active chat happening. So there are a few questions that we'll just pull out to start. But if you have a question, please raise your hand or put it in the chat and we will share it. Let's see. First question, maybe Jeff or John, you could answer is, could you tell us what month those traffic counts were taken that we're basing our model off of? I know you said 2018.
So the counts that we've done mid-block to capture what types of vehicles are moving along the corridor and how fast those vehicles are moving was the end of October, about the 25th, 26th of October. And then just a quick check on some of the intersection location counts. That was the same day. I'm sorry. So we collected all the data along the corridor on the same 25th of October.
And as Jeff mentioned, we have been collecting data throughout the pandemic to understand how traffic volumes are changing along the corridor. I think largely we feel that at this point, traffic has mostly regained the total number that it was pre-pandemic on the corridor. But again, we aren't using recent numbers, we are using the pre-pandemic numbers. And we have added in background growth for known development projects already, including, for example, but only as an example, just the Cody Village project. All right. John, can you say a little bit more about when we choose to have concurrent pedestrian signals, when we don't, what those trade-offs look like?
Sure. So as we said, the exclusive pedestrian phase is generally when other vehicles are not moving. And so it's a time in the whole intersection where we're not able to move other vehicles, but we're able to provide the safest opportunity for peds to cross in all the directions at the same time. We do have a threshold internally of 150 vehicles turning over a crosswalk, where we start to consider changes, whether it's an LPI or revisiting different treatments. That number can go up to 250 when we have adequate sight lines and there's not significant issues with speeding. So some intersections, people making a turn, based on the built geometry of an intersection, they're just able to do that at a much higher speed than we would like. And so we'd want to make that threshold a little bit lower to accommodate for that.
Just to add a little bit, I know you mentioned some of the intersections we are changing from a concurrent phase to an exclusive phase. So we are taking into account the way that people feel uncomfortable at some of these locations today.
Yeah, specifically the Wood Harvard right now is our primary focus.
Yeah. Okay, so one of the questions here, just very roughly, is about planning for public transit service and the idea that, you know, if the bus isn't coming, people aren't going to take the bus, and that people may not be taking public transportation now because of COVID and the pandemic. Does anyone want to take a stab at answering that, or do you want me to? Looks like I'm going to. All right. So absolutely, you know, our transit system doesn't have the full demand that it did before COVID, sort of across all of the commuter rail, subway, light rail, and bus lines. However, some bus lines, including the 28, which runs through Mattapan, Dorchester, Roxbury, etc., actually retained a lot of riders throughout the pandemic because they're folks who don't have another option or for whom the bus is the most expedient way to get to where they're going. We have actually seen that since we introduced free fares on the 28, ridership has increased significantly on that line and in comparison to other lines. We continue to track bus data regularly, including on the 3 bus routes that are free, but also working with the MBTA to understand these trends over time. For scheduling related issues, the MBTA is the agency, it's a state agency that decides where the buses are running and how often they're running. We do collaborate with them on a regular basis, and we try to work together to make sure that our bus service is as good as our residents need it to be, which in a lot of cases is better than it is today. The MBTA is undertaking a project called the Bus Network Redesign, and I think Nathaniel is going to put that link in the chat. That is a really great opportunity for this neighborhood to advocate for more service on the bus routes that you use. This is your opportunity to say, like, this route needs to be a high frequency route for my kids to get to school. So maybe it's the morning rush just needs to be a lot more buses. And those are the types of comments that the MBTA is looking for. So we really encourage you to reach out to them to let them know that we need this. I will also note that we had a meeting about bus stop design 2 months ago. All of that information is up on the website, and we'll share that link in the chat. Either Nathaniel will get to it now or in a few minutes, because I'm kind of throwing him on the spot here. But we did listen very carefully to what bus riders were saying about where stops needed to be located, the kinds of amenities that they need to feel comfortable and safe. And we are working to incorporate that into our design for the corridor. So even though we don't have all of the details worked out yet, we have heard that very strongly, and we are working towards providing that through this redesign process. All right, I'm going to throw this to you, Jeff. The things that we showed tonight, are these the final decisions?
Yes. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for your comments and questions, and please keep them going. We want to kind of keep this discussion going. In regards to the final design for Cummins Highway, we have made the decision to reduce the number of travel lanes along the corridor to 1 in each direction. Through our pilot and through our data that we've collected throughout the pilot, we've learned, some mistakes and ways to kind of improve the final design to make Cummins Highway safer. I think one of the comments said that, that this was not 1970 and there's more vehicles on Cummins Highway. And I agree, there are more vehicles on Cummins Highway, but what we're still seeing, even with these increased amount of vehicles, is that these cars are still able to speed and they're still able to have these serious crashes along the corridor. So there's clearly an issue when it comes to safety on Cummins Highway. So with this project and with this pilot, what we wanted to take a look at was how to improve safety on this corridor, how to slow down vehicles by looking at the engineering. And that's what we've done through the pilot and through some of these models that our transportation department, as well as our design consultant working on this project, have been looking at. So our job for this project and what we've been looking at in terms of the traffic signal design, traffic intersection design, is to try to maintain efficient flow of traffic along the corridor while also providing and improving safety along the corridor. Not just for cars, but for pedestrians and for cyclists. So this is still an ongoing conversation of essentially putting our best foot forward and providing the best design. But ultimately, there needs to be something done in regards to safety to improve Cummins Highway. And these crashes, they continue to happen to this day. I still get, complaints and comments and emails from residents who live on Cummins Highway who don't feel safe about walking or biking along this corridor. So, there are issues with safety that need to be addressed as part of this project, which is why we decided to move forward with reducing the number of travel lanes. This has been a long process, as John mentioned. We have traffic counts from 2018. This has been a long community engagement process. This is the longest community engagement process that I've been involved in terms of a city project, which is, it's a good thing. This is something that needs to happen in order for us, and in order to move forward or not in regards to city projects. But what we find with this design, we're looking to address a lot of the concerns that the residents have brought up from the pilot. When it came to the traffic congestion, cars being backed up because of trash trucks and buses and emergency vehicles. Those are all things that we looked at throughout this pilot. And as part of our final design, we are looking to address those in order to move forward.
I have a yes/no question for you, Jeff. Will
Right
bike
on.
facilities be part of this plan?
Yes. So we are proposing sidewalk level bicycle facilities as part of this project. We're removing the cyclists from the roadways and putting them in their own dedicated accommodation adjacent along the sidewalks. Adjacent to pedestrians. Of course, we'll have buffers to allocate different spaces for everyone. So we'll have spaces for pedestrians, improved spaces for pedestrians on Cummins Highway, a bicycle facility along the sidewalk for cyclists, and of course, cars will have their space along the roadway.
All right. Will the sidewalk, ramps, and curb designs be accessible and friendly to people with disabilities?
That is an absolutely yes. We have new standards that we're working with in regards to our pedestrian ramps, even existing pedestrian ramps that we've reconstructed in the past few years. We've come to understand that they no longer meet today's standards. So ultimately, yes, we're working to provide adequate and these and improve pedestrian facilities for pedestrian for the pedestrian ramps to provide improve line of sight to it's
been a long day for Jeff.
Yes,
we got it.
Yeah, we're looking at
I
different ways to
will,
improve the pedestrian ramps. Go ahead.
I will tell everyone that we do have a meeting planned for May 25th, where we will talk in detail about how we are designing Cummins Highway for people with disabilities. So we'll be able to go into that question in much more detail, and Jeff will be a little bit fresher and less focused on traffic, a little bit more on accessibility issues. Another question, what is the plan for parking along Cummins Highway?
Yeah, so we're not planning on changing regulations along Cummins Highway. For the most part, the parking on Cummins Highway is not regulated. There may be some loss of parking, you mean, in order to accommodate some of the improvements at the intersections. I mean, technically, cars shouldn't be parking 20 feet within an intersection. But for the most part, we're looking at maintaining the majority of the parking along the corridor with no regulations.
A follow-up question, have you considered not allowing parking during certain times of the day?
Honestly, no. We've looked at a parking study along the corridor. I mean, there are some areas where parking is not generally utilized too much. But in terms of removing parking or not letting cars park, no, that's not something that we looked at. This is, I mean, somewhat of a residential street. There's residents that live on Cummins Highway who park on Cummins Highway, and we've been making the most efforts to maintain a lot of that parking.
So we are taking a pretty different approach because this is a residential neighborhood. It's not in downtown Boston. So we are not necessarily looking at time restricted parking or other major limitations that would prevent caregivers and home health aides and family members who are visiting from out of town to come park on Cummins Highway and visit with our residents who live here. All right, Helena, you have had your hand up.
Thank you very much. I'm Helena Chung I am the president of Belknap Family Neighborhood Association. There are also some neighborhood association leaders that are in here. And Jeffrey, you've been to many of these community meetings. We all have. I think it's important to know thy audience. And generally, when we have these meetings, we open them up to voice questions and take a few questions from the chat. This is the point. I mean, many of us have been sitting here for over an hour and 15 minutes. And I think it's just respectful for our area to really know the audience of where you're coming to so that they can ask their questions. So I'm going to stop talking to allow the residents in this area to ask their questions. And I appreciate your presentation. Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Thank you,
Continuing
Elena.
through the questions. Do you live here, Jeff?
Unfortunately, no. I recently bought a house outside of Boston because I was priced out. But hopefully in the future I can come back. But I mean, my mother-in-law still lives over around the corner. But yes, but no longer.
Jeff is being shy. Jeff grew up in Mattapan, has been almost lifelong Boston resident until he
Oh
got
yes,
priced out.
yes. Group of Mattapan. This is, I mean, spent a lot of time on Cummins Highway. But I mean, yes, currently just bought a home this actually a few months ago. So unfortunately, I'm no longer on in Hyde Park near Cummins Highway and unable to bike into work like I prefer to do and enjoy doing actually.
John, would you also answer the question?
I actually just as the pandemic was breaking, purchased a condo down in Ashmont. So I live between the Dorchester and Washington corridors.
Jen?
So I rent in Fields Corner in Dorchester.
All right, another question. Maybe Jeff, you can toss this to John if you want, because he hasn't had to answer a question in a little while. If the roadway is reduced to 1 lane, how do you plan to accommodate school buses?
So I mean, as part of this project, we are looking at the buses, the bus stops. We are looking at making improvements at those locations. We are providing spaces for buses to pull over along the corridor. We understand that, I mean, with school buses, I mean, cars are effectively expected to stop when the stop signal comes on. But I mean, that's something that we've assessed as part of this project as well. John, I don't know if you have anything else to add.
No, I think you hit it. Is that carving out those spaces for buses specifically to pull over, but also that they do deploy the stop sign. And so even if there were 2 lanes, it would be an unsafe condition having cars being able. The other, I think I saw something flash in the chat about emergency vehicles. We are taking that into consideration with the dimensions of the roadway itself. I don't want to speak to pre-program anything, but in removing the median, we are making the dimensions of the travel lanes and the offsets buffer spaces to parking or the curb itself, so that the road is wide enough for people to pull over and let those emergency vehicles pass if that circumstance scenario did happen.
So we don't have full graphics for the corridor because we're still working on the design and taking back all of the comments that we get from folks. So I do want to note that while we are answering a lot of questions about it being 1 lane in each direction, there are quite a few places on the corridor where we have more lanes, and often those are near the signalized intersections. So it is a more balanced approach than simply slashing lanes everywhere. We are really trying to design for the level of traffic that we have out there. Okay. Let me see. I mean, anyone who wants to say their question out loud, please raise your hand. More than happy to unmute you. I haven't seen anyone else except Helena raise her hand, but please do if you have a question. This is a little bit more of a comment, but I'll say it out loud anyway. Pleasant View Street needs the no blocking lines. It's very difficult to leave and enter Cummins. So maybe John, can you give a little quick preview of what we're thinking about these like unsignalized intersections and what we can do to improve that situation? Again, we haven't designed all of this, so I'm really putting John on the spot right now.
That's a great point. And we know that at these unsignalized locations, so I think Pleasant View is a T intersection, yes, checking. So we can look at doing some increased either markings or signage or some type of visual cues to folks so that they're not creating a wall, so to speak. The other benefit of Pleasant View specifically and other smaller side streets that are away from signalized intersections is that the vehicles will generally be moving. So no one will kind of be blocking it because they're waiting for the signal to change. The intersections down near Mattapan Square, those are a little bit of a different situation. And so we are trying to look at those with a different lens, but because we know that queue goes back to the bridge often in the PM. So we're trying to take those into account and look at those in a sensitive way. But we can look at certain areas, specifically Pleasant View, where it has the bus stops potentially on both sides, to put some of those markings on the ground just to give another enforcing visual piece for drivers.
Okay, how many public engagement efforts have been held so far? Jen, do you want to take that one? Actually, I can.
Yes, and actually, if you could you advance to the is it the next slide?
It's
Nope,
up.
maybe not.
It's up. The timeline of the Cummins Highway.
There we go.
program.
Cool. Sorry, I might have a lag. So yes, so we've been at this since April of 2019. We had a series of meetings pre-pandemic, and then those were followed by a pilot that had 2 different phases to it. And then beginning in June of 2021, we began this conversation series where monthly we've talked about a different aspect of the design or different factors that we make sure we include as we're working on the design. So I actually did not count these, but you can see on the slide the meetings we have had, and we're going to continue having this conversation series. And I don't know if maybe this is the time to do this, or if we have other questions. I don't want to cut those short either, but at the end of this discussion section, I will go through a very brief recap of the conversations we've had so far in the series, and then the kind of preview the ones that are coming up next.
Yeah, and I'll just also mention that as part of this project, as part of the project team, we have also attended a number of neighborhood association meetings in order to discuss the Cummins Highway project and to hear from residents about their concerns about this project. I mean, throughout the pilot, and we'll happy to continue to attend those meetings if needed.
And you'll also, if you're out regularly on Cummins Highway, you've probably interacted with Jen, Hannah, Karen, Daniela, others on the team who regularly go out to just talk with people along the street, share information, have one-on-one conversations. We also have office hours where we can have a phone call with a project team to really go into detail on a question that you have, and we've had a number of those as well. So we're really trying to engage with people where they are. I know we've brought Esther to the farmers market for like a full month in October last year, I believe, to talk with people in Haitian Creole. So we're really trying to get out there and talk to people one-on-one, not just in these virtual meetings. All right, Barbara, you have had your hand up.
Yes, at the very first meeting, I asked why not control some of the traffic by putting in more traffic signals. And I think I was told that that couldn't be done. But it seems like in the presentation today, it seemed like traffic signals are going to be added. Is that what's happening? Are we going to be able to get more traffic signals?
So I'll give a half answer, and then Jeff can probably follow up if you'd like. So Right now, we're not proposing to introduce any new intersections to be signalized. When we were talking about new pedestrian crossings or changes to the intersections, it was at existing locations. Only the Rockdale Rexford location is just having a bit of a modification to expand kind of the limits, we'll say, just because of how it's a weird zigzag through the intersection. We want to make sure that we're controlling things properly there. So right now thanks, Stephanie. Right now we're not proposing to fully install any new traffic signalized intersections.
Okay, and one question that's a little bit different from now. You all gonna have any more meetings on American Legion Highway? I don't think I was ever informed when those meetings were happening.
So for American Legion, we held multiple public meetings. We went to neighborhood associations and we sent direct mail to everyone who lives within 800 feet of the corridor to make sure that residents who live there had their voices heard first. We will be continuing work on American Legion, including improving existing crosswalks and adding several new crosswalks that we heard were high demand from residents along the corridor. We have a website for the project that has an email list. If you don't live along the corridor and you want information about the American Legion project, that's the best way to get that directly to you.
Okay, okay.
Nathaniel, could you drop the link to the American Legion project in the chat?
It's coming.
Okay,
Awesome.
thank you.
Thanks. All right, back to Helena. Whoops. Hit the wrong button. There we go.
Hi, I have actually two questions. Would you mind going back to the slide where Greenfield and Bossett, the rotary slide? And I guess my question is, did you all decide to put a rotary there because you didn't want to put a traffic signal there or install a traffic signal there? That's my major question. And I appreciate you all bringing the Bossett out, because that was really a concern about how that was all going to mesh together. My second question is, when you finish the redesign along this road, will there be a place for those that utilize this road on a regular basis to provide feedback and to receive feedback in a timely manner that will also be, if necessary, a mitigation process so that things don't get into the abyss of 311? Thank you.
Jeff, could you answer that second question? I'm going to put up the presentation from the February 2020 meeting when we talked about signalizing this intersection or not.
Sure, no problem. Hey, Helena.
Hey.
Yes. So no, we definitely gonna continue to receive feedback from residents in regards to Cummins Highway. We are working on providing some mitigation as part of this project as well to address some of the concerns that we've heard about the side streets in this corridor. But in terms of this project, what we're looking to do is provide or have metrics that we can kind of measure after the project is done. And that's something that we haven't really done well in the past. But moving forward, that is something that we are looking to include or have residents participate in moving forward. I mean, as I mentioned, like our job today and right now is to put forward the best project for Cummins Highway, given that we've done a pilot, given that we've seen what the issues were, given that we have a better understanding on what this corridor needs. So I mean, it's something that we're looking at. I mean, we're hoping not to have any major issues, I mean, as part of this design, but it's something that we are going to be listening to and assessing when if and when the time comes.
All right, so I have the presentation from that February meeting up. You should be able to see it. Yes, Jeff, this was your meeting.
Yes, I can see it. I can see
Great.
it. So yes.
So do you want to talk through a little bit about how we evaluated and the feedback that we got on these two options?
Yes. So, I mean, one of the major things that we took a look at in regards to traffic signals versus the roundabout is that in terms of the number and the amount of traffic on Cummins Highway that are traveling eastbound and westbound, putting a traffic signal at this intersection would not help reduce the speeds because for the most part, Cummins Highway would receive the green light. So that was one of the main things that we kind of took a look at in regards to a roundabout versus a traffic signal. The other thing is, if you take a look at the roundabout, there's a number of safety improvements that aren't really as, I guess, adequate or as efficient in regards to traffic signals. If you take a look at how the crossings are shortened in reference to the roundabout and the traffic signals, if you take a look at, I mean, in regards to the bicycle facilities and how they navigate around that, it's definitely separated. There's better separation provided for pedestrians, better separation provided for cyclists. So those are all the aspects that we kind of took a look at in regards to how we can provide more of a safer intersection at this location. I mean, I'm familiar with this area. I've driven through this area numerous times. So you understand if you're coming out of Bossett, if you're coming out of Greenfield, and you need to take a left or right onto Cummins Highway, you're essentially just trying to find a spot in order for you to get through this intersection. With a traffic signal, I mean, those will definitely be more controlled. But in terms of getting the traffic to flow through this intersection, as well as being able to maintain slower speeds, we found that a roundabout was a better option. That being said, I mean, we have not received too much opposition to the roundabout in this intersection, which is ultimately why we decided, this is definitely the better and safer option for this location. So that was the main precipice for kind of moving forward with the roundabout.
We also had a survey that we shared that people could respond to in the meeting or send back to us later. So we have some feedback, although maybe Jeff doesn't remember it. It's been a little while, but here you can see these are the things that people felt about the signalized concept for this intersection, where they felt like the benefits were. And here is how people felt about the roundabout option, to understand, some of that feedback from folks in a little finer detail. And we have been collecting feedback since day one on this project. A lot of that is on the website if you wanted to look it through. All right. Helena, your follow-up question?
Yes, thank you, Jeff, for providing that information. I think ultimately I'm thinking about the cyclists that, for instance, if you're traveling from the Stop and Shop and you enter the roundabout and a car into the cyclist and traveling toward Mattapan Square, and a cyclist and a car enters the roundabout, and the cyclist wants to continue, but the car wants to turn onto Greenfield Road. So I'm just looking at that safety aspect right there. How does that work safely for the vehicle and the bicyclist? You follow me?
Yes, Stephanie,
Okay,
do you want
thanks.
to take that one in terms of how cyclists would navigate through this roundabout? I mean, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I get you. That's fine. Give you guys a little break.
Thank you.
Sure. So again, we're still working out all of the details in this blue area, but essentially the cyclists will be sort of around the edge. They will not be in the travel lane. They'll come over here and cross Bossett, and then there's an island kind of to wait, and then to cross Greenfield. So a driver who's coming through and wants to turn down Greenfield will be able to leave the roundabout. This space between this line and the crosswalk is just under 20 feet. So a car could sit right here. So even if you didn't see that there was a person who's walking or a person who's biking over here, you have a place to pause if you need to. But otherwise, the rules of the roundabout are that whoever is there first has the priority and others yield. So if you are already in your vehicle and you're coming through, it is up to the cyclist and the pedestrians to let you go and then cross safely.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Gina.
How are you?
Hi.
Hi, I have two questions. One, do you have a actual picture of the roundabout rather than the diagram, like a street picture?
No,
No,
we
okay.
have a rendering from the concept, which I can
Okay.
find and put up on the screen quickly.
Okay.
But
the other-
yeah, we do need,
yeah.
we are,
Yeah.
like, we are still
Because
working on the design.
Okay. 'Cause
So
this
even
yeah,
just this
doesn't
graphic,
happen.
yeah, this graphic like was made yesterday. Like that's
Okay.
that's how much we're still working on things.
Okay.
But we absolutely will have like ground level, what it looks like when you're a driver views, because definitely this is not the easiest for everyone to understand.
Okay. And the second one is the right turn at American Legion Highway and Cummins Highway. When they did the pilot, the traffic was basically backing up to by where the cemetery was. So what are they going to do about that when you want to make a right turn there by the, yeah, what are they going to do about
John,
that?
you want to take that?
Yeah, so right now, so we're talking all the way to the west there, in front of the restaurant. By
Correct.
Yep.
You
Okay.
want to make a right turn there.
Yeah. So
I mean,
so
you
we,
have people, wait a minute, you have people
Go ahead.
taking instead of going all the way down, they were taking a right at the cemetery and going through that
Calvary
way.
Road, Mount
Right,
Calvary,
yeah.
and then picking a street to go back over to American
Correct,
Legion.
yeah.
Right. So so right now the project limits for Cummins Highway and the full reconstruction that Jeff was laying out, we're not actually reaching that far to the west. But we do know that the issue that you just raised, we did have a conversation. Our signals team did receive some of those comments, and they did kind of come to us about how to modify it a little bit. So there were some changes that we had made about how far back that right turn space extended and where the separation for the bike facility ended and things like that, because we did know that there were a lot of folks who were very used to that free right. Just it's not signalized. And so it was kind of a pocket turn lane. So we can continue to look at that type of thing in that location, but that's just not under the purview of this larger project. But it's certainly something that, our signals folks can continue to try to look at.
But it's not so much a signal. You just can't take a right turn because you got people going to your left, people going straight.
Right.
The people taking a right can't move at all because the bike lane is there.
Right. And the bus stop is at some point in front of the Genero. Yeah. Yep. And we can take that again. The intersection, even though that movement's not signalized, it's still under the purview of our signals team. So I'm happy to bring that back to them and we can figure out how to maybe extend that right turn area or make sure that people can still move. I know that without the flex posts, people are kind of just using the curb space as a right turn advance from the bus stop.
Right.
So we can kind of try and see what design changes are possible there. It's just not part of the larger corridor thing effort right now. So.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
All right. Another question in here, maybe Jeff, you can answer. So I know on the screen what we're like showing a zoom in here, but could you please confirm that right after the screen, the on-street parking, especially in front of the funeral home, is still there?
Yes. So we are maintaining on-street parking in front of the funeral home. I believe it's the Davis Funeral Home. They also have parking behind their building. We have been in communication with them in regards to the roundabout. I mean, it's been a while, but I mean, they did have a favorable opinion of the roundabout because they're able to traverse around the roundabout in order to go eastbound down Cummins Highway, which they weren't able to do prior. So, I mean, from my understanding, it was favorable for the roundabout to be provided at this intersection for them.
All right, Deborah?
Yes, so thank you so much for these meetings. I've attended a few of them, and really happy with how it's adjusted over time. I do have a question with the roundabout. So if I'm heading from Mattapan Square, heading west, and I hit the rotary, and I want to turn onto Wayposit, how do I navigate the roundabout to be able to safely get like 3/4, basically make that left-hand turn? Currently, to do it, what I do now is I dismount and walk across that intersection, but I'm wondering how what is the route you're expecting a bicyclist to be able to do? Or is it just sort of like the first in the rotary has the right of way? Will there be, painted bikes, share road symbols on the ground, on the pavement, or?
I mean, we're still looking at it, but I think effectively, I mean, if you're comfortable, I mean, you can definitely dismount, and travel across. I mean, this, from my understanding, we're probably going to be having a one-way direction for the bicyclists. So you probably need to go all the way around, where Stephanie is kind of just navigating her cursor in order to get to Bossett Street. If you're comfortable, mean, jumping into the roundabout, I mean, that's something you can do as well. We're ultimately trying to provide the safest way for cyclists to kind of get around here. But yes, I mean, even if it's a little bit longer, we definitely want cyclists to be safe and comfortable.
I mean,
in terms of how they travel.
I'd rather stay in the saddle, so that maybe some signage and some bike symbols on the pavement that this is a share the road location.
So actually at this roundabout, we are providing fully separated bike facilities for the entire roundabout. There is no need for cyclists, unless they want to be sharing the lane with vehicles. But it is legal in Massachusetts for cyclists to do that. If you want to get into the travel lane, you can use the crosswalks, the ramps at the crosswalks to get in. Obviously, you need to make sure there's a gap in traffic, and then you can get in and continue through if you want. But the design here is meant so that if you are taking your kids to the park, or to another friend's house or whatever, that you don't have to ride in the street, or your kids don't have to ride in the street, but there is a separated bike facility for the entire circle.
So how do you essentially turn left if you're heading west?
The same way that you would if you were in a car, just right next to them. So if you're in a vehicle and you wanted to turn left, you would go through the roundabout, kind of do a U-turn, and then come through.
Okay.
On a bike, same thing. You would go around, U-turn, and then through.
But you're saying I don't have to go into the street. I'd be in a bike lane. That's what I don't understand.
Correct.
I have to cross the street at some point.
Yes. So you would cross the street.
I see.
Where the pedestrians also are crossing
I
the
see.
street.
Okay. Okay.
So there will be bike specific markings and other indications that it is a bike space or a pedestrian space or a general travel lane.
So that's essentially after the cars have exited the roundabout, I would be turning left across them.
You would wait for a gap in the same way that if you were crossing the street as a pedestrian, or if you were entering the roundabout, you would wait for a gap in the traffic to be able to
see.
do that.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. It is 8:15. Thank you so much to everyone for staying with us. I'm going to speed us through some of the what's next information. A lot of this, I know some of you have heard multiple times, but as a reminder, we started these virtual meetings in June. We hosted a special edition of our Tea Talk series, which is hosted by community organizations in Mattapan and Roxbury. we brought Charles T. Brown to talk about the ways that mobility of Black Americans has been limited throughout the US by police, policies, and polity. And you can click on these links that Nathaniel's going to put in the chat to catch up with Charles. He has been releasing a podcast and has other information on his Twitter account and his website that you may want to see. We hosted 2 meetings in July with our environment department. We talked about our heat resilience study and about air quality and how the redesign of Cummins Highway fits into that overall planning effort by the city to reduce the heat island effect and to improve air quality. As a follow-up to that meeting, some of our friends in the environment department, the public works department, and the mayor's office actually were able to install some air quality sensors along or near Cummins Highway. So here's a picture of one being installed. What we're hoping to learn before the reconstruction is just what are we seeing today in terms of air quality? But we're also using this as a pilot for the rest of the city. Is this something that is like a good technology? Does this provide new information to us? Is it easily accessible to our residents? And we will have an online dashboard to share in real time the information that these sensors are gathering. In August, we had a meeting with the Boston Planning and Development Agency to talk about Plan Mattapan, land use planning, transportation planning, and this link between development and transportation. In September, we learned all about streetlights across the city, including hearing about what you wanted us to take back about streetlights on Cummins Highway. So we have been working with our street lighting division on updates to the design plans. In October, we had a meeting with the Public Health Commission to talk about street design and health and well-being and the connection between our general community level of health and our streets. So we heard from you about traffic. This was during the pilot. So, we heard a lot about the concerns, and that's one of the reasons why, it was only a pilot, because we wanted to see how things worked. We have been collecting some traffic counts on side streets to better understand how people are moving through the residential parts of Mattapan and Hyde Park. And we are also continuing this conversation with all of you, engaging residents in the process, as Jen discussed earlier in the meeting. In January, we talked about bus stops and how to design for accessible bus stops, where they should be. We heard your feedback about the amenities that are not amenities, but necessities at your bus stops. Last month, we learned about street trees. Jen was one of our featured speakers to talk about how we're planning for new street trees on Cummins Highway. And we talked about the citywide urban forest plan, which had an open house very recently. So there's a lot of information out there for you to catch up on street trees. And then our next meeting is next month. We're going to talk about age-friendly street design. Something that we've heard a lot from you is just how does this design help our elders and people who will be our elders, and what does that look like? And so we'll be joined by our friends in the Age Strong Commission who are working on Age-Friendly Boston to learn a little bit more about that. And Jen, back to you for some resources.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. So if you've been at one of these meetings before, you'll know that this portion at the end, we like to share other things with you that we have heard about that are happening in the neighborhood. So I will run through those. All right, so as was mentioned earlier in the meeting, Route 23, 28, and 29 are all free. And this will be free for at least 2 years. This is a pilot, and our colleague Kirsty has done a lot of work on this, and I think I'm not sure if she's still in the meeting, but she was earlier. But you can find all sorts of information about this at boston.gov. Well, actually, I won't read the links because Nathaniel's going to put them in the chat, and it's late. So, but more information available on our website. And there also will be a public meeting coming up this week, hosted by the Mayor's Office of Housing. And you'll get to meet the 2 selected development teams for sounds like 8 out of the 10 parcel B1 parcels. So more information at the link that Nathaniel just dropped. All right, and then it is going to be spring soon, regardless of what the weather is like out there now. Although I do think it was getting a little bit warmer maybe when I bike home. If you or folks in your life would be interested in learning more about bike repair, a great organization, Bikes Not Bums, is hosting a number of different programs. Sisters in Action, this Earn a Bike program, and then Bike Institute. So there's.
I will note that these are for youth, not for
you,
adults.
yes.
All of these are for youth.
Yes, thank you,
so
Stephanie.
please encourage your
youth in your life,
young people in your life. If they want to learn more, this is the place for you.
If you're an adult and would like to learn more bike repair, you can send a personal message to me and I can hook you up with that too. So no one will be left out. All right, on to the next one. We also, at all of our meetings, like to share that we promote Blue Bikes, which is our public bike share system owned and managed by the city of Boston and our surrounding municipalities. We have a discount program where passes are only $50 a year or $5 a month. More information in the link that Nathaniel just put in there. All right, and the city is also offering discounted internet. So there's a $30 monthly discount on internet, or $100 off a new laptop, tablet, or desktop computer. So you can follow that link for more information. And Boston, so the Madison Square Main Streets is hiring for an executive director. So if, again, you or someone in your life you think would be a good fit for helping pave the way for, that was kind of a pun, but for Main Streets, for an active and exciting area, follow that link and share it widely. All right, and then the City of Boston's Rental Relief Fund is still open. There is, follow that link for more, or call the number on the screen for more information about that. All right, and finally, we really hope you will stay in touch. We're so excited to see so many people in this meeting and how active you all were in asking questions. Please do visit the project website. There's a place there where you can sign up for email updates, so you'll be sure to be the first person to know about our upcoming meetings and other kind of milestones that we share. There's also opportunities, as was previously mentioned, to book one-on-one appointments with myself or another member of our project team, which is the link, the second link on the page. And then Jeff has shared his email address. So if you want to get in touch with him, that is an option as well.
Yes, one last question from the chat before we go. Jeff, when is construction starting? Do we know what's between now and then?
Yes. So we are aiming to hopefully start construction at the end of this year. We're thinking, I mean, October, November, but more likely it would be in the spring of 2023. We're trying to get through this design, this final design. We have an accelerated schedule, but we're looking at final plans to be submitted to us probably more so in August to September. By the time we get a
That is
we
so
get it.
aggressive. I can't even imagine that's gonna happen.
Yes, yes. Yeah, by the time it gets advertised and we get a contractor on board, we'll probably be at the end of the season. So we're looking at more than likely a start of spring 2023.
All right, thank you, everyone. I appreciate all of the time that you spent with us tonight. Information will be up on the website within the week, and everyone here tonight will get an email. So have a great one. Good night.